Okay, so it's 5:32 on March 16th. I'd like to call the FinCom meeting to order. We'll grant permission for the Westwood Media Center to live stream and record the meeting. And I'd like to ask if anyone else would like to record the meeting. Not hearing anything, let's move forward. I'd like to start by just mentioning that pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 orders, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and the governor's March 15, 2020 order, imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place. This hearing is being held remotely. The public is encouraged to join our meeting and participate fully. Members of the public attending this meeting virtually will be allowed to make comments if they wish to do so during the portions of the hearing designated for public comment. You'll be queued into the system and called upon, or your questions will be read at the moment in the agenda that we allow that. I'd like to say right up front to the public, if there's anyone out there, that in order to be recognized, please provide your full name and address so that just as you would in any meeting, just that we can recognize you. And I'll also say that tonight we're kind of under, I don't think we'll have problems meeting the time constraints, but we're under a strict time constraint because the public broadcasting of this is going to be cut off at 6:55 as the Westwood Media Center has to move over to the planning board meeting at that point in time. Anyone that, if the meeting goes longer than that, that will be available via the Westwood Media Center after the fact when they post that. The other thing I'd like to mention before we announce the members is that Kate Wynn is not with us tonight. Kate has announced that she's running for the planning board and therefore she's required actually to resign from FinCom. Kate has been a great addition to FinCom in the short time that she's been here, and we're really going to miss her contributions. And I think Tom will probably say something too, because I know that Kate contributed to his subcommittee. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Jane, to call the roll.
Ready. Peter Lentz.
Here.
Bill Bruce.
Here.
Lauren Fitzpatrick.
Here.
Craig Castaldo.
Here.
George Hertz.
Here.
Angela Hughes.
Here.
Peter Ittig.
Here.
Caitlin Jerzak.
Here.
Tom Kilgariff.
Here.
Diane McCarthy.
Here.
Chris Pareda. He's here.
I said here.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Mike Powers.
Here.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to start off by doing the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So this is a real important meeting for us tonight. This is really, in my mind, the culmination of a lot of work. And that work is done by FinCom members, but also the town department heads, the administrators, the employees. There's a huge amount of effort involved. And I'd like to, and I know the subcommittee heads and members would echo this, but I want to thank all the town, as I said, department heads, administrators, and employees that have supported us through everything in this process. They've been available to us at any time, and they've done really a great job in putting this together. I think it's one of the things that when I first got onto the FinCom, I really didn't, as just a town member, I didn't have an appreciation for all the work that was done by the townsfolk, all the different department heads and the employees. And just thanks again. And obviously thanks to our FinCom members who have had to meet with all the department heads and go through the budgets and ask a lot of questions and then do their write-ups that culminate with these presentations tonight. So thanks to everyone. What I'll do is now I'll turn it over to Tom Kilgariff, who's the Municipal Subcommittee Chair. And Tom, I'll let you run it, and I'm sure you'll have other folks talking besides yourself.
Great, thanks, Peter. Yeah, we'll have each person sort of present their section that they had handled and all. And so, so Jane, should I now go about sharing my screen with those PowerPoint slides? And how, and if Connor is on, how do I do that, Connor?
So it's actually Erica, but what you're gonna do is go down to the bottom where it says share screen.
Down to the bottom where it shares. Oh, I'm in the PowerPoint, I'm sorry. So let me go back to share screen. Yep. All right, cool. Great. And I'll go into presentation.
Up at the top.
How do I go to presentation mode? File?
Right where it says view, I believe.
View, makes sense. View. Where is?
Or slide, try slideshow.
Slide. Oh, slideshow. From beginning. Okay, cool.
There we go.
Let's see if that, yeah, great. All right, cool. Thanks, Eric. I appreciate it. Good evening, everybody. So on the Municipal Committee with myself, we're Chris Pereira, who vice chaired the committee, Angela Hughes and Kate Wynn. And as Peter said, that Kate is running for planning board, so no longer on the FinCom, but she did a really nice job while she was with us, and she attended a number of calls, and it was she was very interactive and asked a lot of really good questions, and it was great having Kate on the team, and great to have her perspective on things too. So it's always nice to have a variety of perspectives and thoughts. It makes the team better. So with that, the quick overview, I'll touch on the overview and the process, and then by department, each person, Angela handled the police, Chris the fire, Kate the public works, so I'll comment on them. Community and economic development, I'll cover. Chris will cover culture and recreation, library, and then I'll finish up with some general government and closing remarks and whatnot. So in terms of the process, it's again, it's a meeting, in this case Zoom meetings with department heads of each of the departments in town, and they were great once again, as they are every year. And among the topics, obviously, in addition to department goals and budget and objectives, but obviously COVID-19 and its impact was a big part of every discussion as well. And I'll slide through these slides, fairly quickly, so we cover it all. But it's all there in detail. So if anyone has questions, we can certainly refer back to it. So sort of an overview, the budget this year for FY22 is projected at just over 22 million, which is a 3.17% increase over fiscal year 21. And that's that budget, the way it's broken down, it remains a very salary-driven budget, where 79% is salaries and 21% expenses. And that 3.17% is actually the lowest it's been in it looks like about 4 years. Let's see, I'm just going to move this out of my way here. So as I mentioned, the proposed changes for the year, it's a 3.6% increase in salaries and a 1.8% increase in overall expenses. In terms of the budget increase of $604,000, that's the typical contractual obligations, COLA, et cetera. There was a public health nurse position that increased from part-time to full-time. And I believe that was in the works even prior to COVID-19. So the timing was certainly impeccable. Building inspections increased this year too, because of an increase in building and therefore the required inspection hours to handle that. No full-time positions were included in the coming year's budget. In terms of the increase in expense of $83,000, that increase again is 1.8%. By comparison, last year's proposed increase from the prior year was 5%. So obviously it was a significant tightening of the belt in terms of projected increase in expenses. So police department is first on the docket. And so I will hand that right over to Angela Hughes, who did a great job with our police chief.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So for fiscal year 22, the proposed budget is 4.9%. I'm sorry, 4.9 million, which is a moderate increase of 2.6%. Basically, for the most part, is salary driven. One expense that really stood out was the training budget, which you know, we discussed a little bit and have been advised that, you know, it lags significantly comparable to other towns, but we should expect that a moderate increase for future years to come, I guess, based on the mandated training that will be required for the new police reform bill. No expected change in the overall staff, will remain at 46. The overtime forecast increased slightly, and that was as a result of the backfill of for training. And then there is a slight decrease in the operational costs forecasted as at 1%. Overall, in terms of the performance measures, the crimes appeared to increase slightly. And then in terms of the police activity decreased significantly. And that was based on mainly the pandemic, you know, less people moving around. So there was less activity. But, you know, some of the selected performance measures that really stood out were the 911 calls. That increased 25% in 2020 after a 4.1% decrease in 2019. And that attributes to the calls now for Westwood. 911 calls are all being handled by the town as opposed to the state police. And so we shouldn't see much of an increase going forward now that I guess previous years, they just didn't have all the calls being routed correctly. The dispatch calls increased a little, but not much from 2019. 2019 was 19%, slight increase of 14% this year. Larcenies and thefts increased significantly, and that attributed to stimulus checks, missing stimulus checks and unemployment checks not being received. Disturbance calls, not much of an increase, 14%. Citations decreased 47%, and the total arrest decreased 41%. So overall, the performance measures in comparison to 2019, you know, just really shows that even though we were in the middle of a pandemic, you know, the police were able to continue the high demand and service, and they did it 100%. Tom, I don't see your, maybe it's me, but I don't see the presentation anymore. Did I do something?
No, it's there.
Everyone else see it?
We can still see it.
We can see it.
All right, that's okay. I have it in front of me. So we can go to the next slide. I must have hit something with my computer. I've been having technology problems all day, sorry. So in terms of the pandemic, as I mentioned, the service remained the same, just it wasn't what they did, it was how they did it. And safety awareness with operational hygiene, being taken into consideration. Also maintaining, PPE and filtration of the department. These are all things that they will continue to do going forward. And then, one of the big things that were noted was the operational service. There was an option to take calls via phone as opposed to, handling or talking to an officer in person. That was something that went very well. And continue going forward. Prior year's accomplishments, the increased staff diversity, maintained high visibility, as I mentioned, that didn't change at all. They added some hybrid vehicles, looking to continue to do that for the patrol fleet. And then the innovation during the pandemic, they were able just to continue full operational services throughout the global pandemic. Key initiatives, they'll continue to seek the state accreditations. They've been, something that's been ongoing for a while, so that will continue. As I mentioned, the hybrid patrol vehicles, enhancing partnerships, collaborating around areas of mental health, opioid addiction, and then targeting community police initiatives within the town. So the budget, the fiscal 22 budget is $226,000, and that will be based around replacing vehicles, traffic safety and equipment, and radio infrastructure. Great.
Awesome.
I'm all set.
Great. Thanks, Angela. And Peter, will we do questions at the very end?
Yeah, I think it'd probably be worthwhile to do questions at the end so you can actually run through your presentation and folks can do it then.
Great. Perfect. Great. So on to fire with Chris. All yours, Chris.
I want to first take myself off mute. All right, so thank you very much, Tom. I want to also take the opportunity to thank Chris Coleman and Pam Dukeman and Jane for arranging the calls to the department heads and making the department heads available. Everything went very smoothly and we had some great conversations. As far as the fire department is concerned, thanks for Chief Decker for giving me all of the good information that he did. As you can see, it's a modest increase in the operating budget for fiscal year 22 over fiscal year 21, 3.55% overall, 2% in operating expenses and 3.65% in salaries. The salary increases, as with the police and other municipal departments, mostly contractual requirements, also some technology improvements result in some operating expenses going higher. I will mention at this time that COVID did result in some overtime increases for the fire department, but we were fortunate to get reimbursement from some funds available from FEMA and under the CARES Act. Our fire department remains at 45 FTE authority for fiscal year 22. There aren't 45 firefighters on board right now, but we had one hire last year, one vacancy is in process. Maybe Chief Deckers can fill us in on the progress of that. And he expects some retirements for opening some vacancies for fiscal year 22. I really applaud the fire department's effort during COVID. They reported that initially ambulance calls were way down. They had a lot of people initially at the beginning of the pandemic, refused to be transported. So because no one wanted to be anywhere near a hospital in the beginning of the pandemic. The old adage became true: you don't want to get sick, don't go to a hospital. One big thing that I'll note that in the summer of last year, 2020, when Norwood Hospital suffered its calamity and got flooded, and now the hospital is closed, it affected Westwood because our ambulance runs now increased from maybe as short as 20 minutes just going from Westwood to Norwood, and they were very efficient at in-processing patients. Now an ambulance run may take as long as 2 hours. Now, why you say that? We have hospitals that are closer than Boston, but we can only transport patients to recognized trauma centers. So that means the hospitals in Boston or the South Shore or Brockton. It takes years for hospitals to get recognized as trauma centers, and perhaps BID and Needham will go that route. We don't know. If it does, that would help us out. But right now, our ambulance runs are really causing a lot of overtime and taking the ambulance out of service for a long portion of time. One thing I'll also note that during the past year, the fire department worked closely with DPW and the Dedham Westwood Water District regarding hydrant maintenance. Now, we know that from our meeting last week, that Warrant article about the private maintaining private hydrants was withdrawn, but it hasn't gone away. We'll see it again, and it results from commercial developers installing hydrants in their buildings and then maybe not telling the people who then occupy the buildings that those hydrants are not maintained by the town. So we need it's a little bit of a loophole in the obligations of commercial landowners and commercial businesses to make sure they know that they need to maintain those hydrants. As far as University Station is concerned, in fiscal year 20, overall, responses to University Station were about 14% of all the responses the fire department encountered. That's level for the third year in a row. So that's probably, if you ask what's the impact of University Station on our fire department, it's about 14% of all the calls. 2/3 of those calls are medical in nature. And of important note here is that the bridges accounts for 4 or 5 calls per week. And I believe when the developer first went in there, they intimated that they would handle some of their calls themselves. Instead, Westwood Fire Department is handling a lot of ambulance calls out of the bridges. Going forward, in fiscal year 22, the fire department seeks capital funding for an engine replacement lease payment. That's the 5th of 5 lease payments, and some turnout gear and replacement radio. That's all within the municipal funding article. With ambulance receipts, the fire department wants to replace the ambulance itself. That's a significant buy at $387,000, and also purchase some self-contained breathing apparatus. That's what SCUBA stands for, and some rescue rescue equipment upgrade and replacement. The one borrowing request that the fire department is seeking is a $400,000 to purchase a multi-purpose vehicle, or what's been called in the past a swap body vehicle. This is really to replace squad cars 1 and 2 that at least one of those 2 is currently out of service and one of them is very nearly out of service. And each one of those squad cars would cost $400,000 or better to replace. Instead, Chief Deckers wants to use $400,000 to buy a multi-purpose vehicle that can better and more efficiently meet the demands that he wants to use it for. It revolves around changing the staffing model from having two completely identical companies within Westwood, one stationed in Islington and one stationed on High Street in Fire Station 1, to having a fire department that in which all the firefighters are trained on multiple response equipment, and the equipment itself can be moved. You know, the town isn't that big, so the equipment itself can be moved to where it needs to be moved. And this swap body vehicle performs just exactly that. It also helps with the maintenance of the air breathing replacement unit that's currently in fire station number 1 and needs a lot of maintenance. So that is in need of being replaced itself. That replacement will be taken care of with one of the multi-purpose vehicle chassis or platforms on demand rather. And then that can be moved around wherever we need it to be. Chief Deckers used the example of if we had to respond to a large structure fire, then initially the multi-purpose vehicle could respond with a fire suppression body, leave that fire suppression body at the scene, go back, pick up this air breathing unit, come back to the scene, and then the firefighters would be able to replenish their air supply right at the scene rather than having to wait for that equipment to get transported back to Station 1 and then back to the scene. So it really makes more sense to replace squad cars number 1 and 2 with just this one multi-purpose chassis and the various platforms on demand. So I'll leave it over to Chief Deckers if he wants to elaborate on what I've said, but I think that's what the fire department has going forward.
Great. Thanks, Rick.
At this time, I don't have anything to elaborate on, but I'll answer questions downstream.
All right, great.
Great, thanks, Chris, and thank you, Chief. So moving along to Public Works, and Kate Wynn handled this area with Todd Corchin and his team, and so I'll give a quick summary of this, and as you go through a lot of these slides, it's almost you see in terms of accomplishments, it was almost like business as usual despite the pandemic. So so prior accomplishments, a lot of paving projects and maintenance with sewer and pond. In terms of COVID impact, the day-to-day operations were relatively unchanged, but they did maintain fields and buildings and all ready for when they would be opened up and ready for use again. In terms of the overall budget, proposed increase of 3.4% and level staffing. In terms of future capital needs, stormwater MS4 requirement and the turf field replacement at the high school, the multi-purpose field behind the parking lot. And in terms of fiscal year 22 capital borrowing, looking at the sewer project and infiltration plan maintenance for $500,000 and a roadside sweeper and truck for $250,000. So, so again, great job to Todd and his team again, and doing a very usual job in an unusual year. So, and we do thank Kate for all her work and effort. Back to Chris on culture and recreation, and the success stories for both.
Yes, quite success stories. Kudos should go out to our library staff and our recreation staff during this COVID year. They really stepped up. In the library, modest increases for overall budget, 3.3%. Salaries are increasing by 3.7%. The library saw 7 longtime employees opt for retirement. They weren't affected because the Islington branch wasn't open, so they were able to use the staff from the Islington branch to offset those retirements. But going forward in in fiscal year 22, we expect the Islington branch to reopen in its new location, and then we'll be hiring up to fill those long-time vacancies. Capital requests to add new printers both at the main branch and at the new library branch, and a new material sorter at the main branch. It's been 9 years, I guess it is, since we opened the new library, and technology has advanced in terms of sorters to the point where the library thinks a new handler is better than trying to revamp the existing one. The library did a lot of work trying to pivot from having people come to the library and take out books to giving access to the library's collection through homebound delivery or curbside pickups, or even digital programming. They did a lot of programming with the seniors and with the schools to try to keep the town connected through the library. So kudos go out to the library staff. Similarly with recreation, Westwood was one of the few towns to even have a summer recreation program last summer. We did it, and not only did we do it, but it was completely funded through receipts. Great effort by the recreation staff there. Recreation proposes a budget of about $500,000, which is a 1.6 increase over fiscal year 21. Salaries increased due to the minimum wage step up, according to state law. The biggest thing with recreation is their capital requests. They have a couple of capital requests that are in long need. There's $200,000 to replace the pool deck. The deck on our pool is the original deck. It was installed in 1972. So the reason we need to replace it is because it's well past its useful life, and the mastic that sticks the tile to the concrete subflooring is beginning to fail, resulting in the tile deck becoming a little bit unstable in parts. We can't have that. That would subject the town to too much risk of injury and liability. So we really need to replace the pool deck. That's about $200,000. Along with that, it's 15 years since we've done a major periodic maintenance on the pool mechanism and the pool itself. So that's about $110,000. Both projects could be done simultaneously if enough coordination were done between those two contractors. But even if not, the pool would be likely unavailable for a month for each project. If it's done simultaneously, then it would be a month total. Actually, the rec department said 2 to 3 weeks for each project. I upped it to a month because you know how these things go. But I think that's the top end. I don't think it'd be more than a month. Long-term capital need for the rec department to keep in mind, and this isn't yeah, it's important, but keep it in mind that we need dedicated space for the rec department. Going forward, if we have municipal space that can be repurposed, or you know, it doesn't need to be a brand new building of some sorts. Of course, that would be ideal, but we just keep it in mind along with all the other capital needs that the town has. And that's all for the cultural, library, and recreational.
Thanks, Chris.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Chris. So moving along to community and economic development, and so you know, and again, thank you to Nora Loughnane and Pam Dukeman and Chris Coleman for their time and energy in helping us you know, understand all the accomplishments of these departments this past year and going forward. And one thing to mention too is that while there's a bunch of stuff listed here on each of these slides, I think the same theme applies to all these departments, that by no means, there's a whole lot more that was accomplished throughout the town in all of these departments than what we have listed here and what we're touching on. there was an incredible amount of work and a lot of effort and a lot of stuff done. That was a lot of good stuff. So I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that this isn't it. This is some snippets and summary. So please, everyone, know that that is the case. So moving along, the budget proposed increase for FY22 is 6.6% over last year. Again, majority of the budget is for salaries in the various divisions. In terms of accomplishments, and I'll just sort of touch on each one real briefly here, but and again, these aren't the full extent of accomplishments for the year, but obviously the Islington Center revitalization project that continues, and with the culmination of Plan Phase 3 and that closing scheduled for the end of this calendar year. University Station opened up 2 new office buildings in this past year, and repurposing the Bonefish Grill space with a new restaurant. So again, some further development with university. Municipal planning, again, there's a whole lot of work that goes on with that, and it's the constant maintenance of the plan and pushing that ball forward. So a lot of stuff, a lot of work with the planning board and ZBA and so forth. So affordable housing, I think it's special to note that progress was made during a global pandemic, and most notably the former Westwood Lodge property was developed, and that development, along with 2 single-family homes, significantly reduces the gap that we might be otherwise facing with our subsidized housing inventory unit count for 40B. So a lot of really good progress in 2020 on the affordable housing, but that remains a goal going forward as well. And business outreach, there was a tremendous amount of outreach, trying to make contact with businesses, get contact information, phone numbers, emails, and whatnot, and in order to work with businesses in terms of timely information and updates regarding pandemic regulations, changes, etc., and trying to help everybody navigate through waters that no one had been through before the best they could. So areas of focus going forward, I mentioned affordable housing, and obviously the need to maintain a minimum of 10% affordable housing units, and based on the results of our 2020 U.S. Census. Islington Center, looking forward to the completion of Wentworth Hall, as well as the development of the new Islington Center building, and obviously doing all that while trying to maintain a character, the village character that's known and appreciated in Islington. And University Station, they'll continue to work with the developer and approval authorities down in that area to try to make best use of that space for both office and retail. It was mentioned in prior meetings, other commercial development, and there's some other areas of town, including Everett Glacier area. There was University Ave, Southwest Park, and Providence Highway, and some of the High Street commercial corridor too, looking for, again, any opportunities that might make sense for the town going forward. Online permitting was another, was expanded this past year, obviously in large part due to the pandemic, but probably a good change and a more efficient maneuver going forward. Moving along to general government, and again, and thanks so much to Pam and Chris Coleman for their time and going through this stuff with us. The overall budget, an increase of 1.2% from fiscal year 21. Again, that generally includes you know, general government departments, select board, finance, assessors, treasurers, et cetera. By comparison, prior 2 years increases, I think it's you know, it's notable that they were 4.2% last year and 3.3% the year prior in terms of forecasted increase. So certainly again, the tightening of the belt. You know, prior accomplishments, the impact of COVID on the town. Obviously, the pandemic changed how the town governed last year. Buildings were closed, fields, playgrounds were closed, schools were closed, and learning done remotely. Obviously, restaurants and retail establishments closed. So everything then pivoted to Zoom, new means of communication, and you know, the public safety, the health departments, all entering this stuff, as everyone did in the world, these uncharted territories, but did so in such a fantastic way, really. I mean, it was all done learning on the go, for sure, and in doing so, and everyone, regardless of if someone maybe didn't agree with every fine detail of how things were handled, everybody was trying to do the best they could in a very tough situation and do it in the healthiest and safest way possible. So a couple other things regarding last year and the differences of last year. The town meeting was obviously held outdoors for the very first time at Flahay Field. The town was granted a quorum reduction from 175 registered voters to a floor of only 44 registered voters. So thank you, Pat Ahern, for getting that done, and that was done. My understanding is, you know, very quickly and early on. And because of that quorum change, only financial articles could have been heard at last year's town meeting while everything else was tabled. A couple of other things, and again, this is by no means the entirety of the list, but the select board did a number of things to help as well. They extended some property tax bill due dates. Restaurants were permitted to offer table service outdoors, and then also offered a one-time reduction in fee for alcohol and entertainment licenses. So it was, I sort of mentioned it before, but although 2020 was very different and challenging for everyone, town government continued to conduct business as usual in a very unusual year. Next year's goals, continuing to track and report federal help and CARES activity related to COVID-19, continue to upgrade hardware and software in a cost-effective manner, also continuing the security assessment of municipal facilities and implementation of those recommendations, and then obviously a continued effort on town affordable housing numbers and metrics. Fixed costs for municipal and school employees. Fiscal year 21 was 14.2 million. We expect an increase of 8.5%. That should say fiscal year 22, so that's my typo there. But that 8.5% increase is a number of things. It's pension with an increase of 7%, health insurance costs an increase of 5%, other 6%, and then the remaining attributed to municipal workforce is 45%. Waste collection and disposal rising by just under 8%. So summary and takeaways again, 2020 was a trying year for everyone. Hard decisions made locally at the state and federal levels. But we would certainly, I think we've all said this at one point or another on the FinCom, but town government and administrators, I think they've handled all of the challenges admirably and exceptionally well, and handled it with grace through a tough time. And with all the department heads, again, year after year, it's a group of highly engaged, organized folks, very helpful and open to our requests and questions, and helping us understand their goals and accomplishments. All the departments continue to use objective measurements to evaluate performance and really quantify things and help us understand. And overall, as we look at everything, we think that the FY22 budget, all the requests seem appropriate, given future needs and where the level of service everyone wants it to be at. So that is that's the municipal report. And again, thank you again to all the department heads for your help and time spent with that. And again, that's just a snippet of what everybody accomplished in the town last year, in a tough time. So thanks very much, and thanks to the Muni team for doing a great job. I just reported.
Hey, thanks, Tom. That was a great summary. I want to echo your thoughts about the support that you get from all the different the town employees and department heads. We couldn't do all that we do to do this evaluation without all their great support. Municipal is kind of where I started when I started working. Working is the wrong word. Part of my start with the FinCom, and municipal requires a lot of coordination, a lot of effort, and so really do appreciate the efforts of you and the folks on your subcommittee for all that you've done. Maybe if you could stop sharing at this point in time, we could kind of see a gallery view, and then we could see if anyone first on FinCom had any questions for the presenters or any of the department heads. So let me hold off there. Anybody want to raise their hand that has any questions? Did I see Craig or Peter? Craig, okay, Craig, why don't you start?
Sure. I had a question that's probably best directed for Chief Deckers or Chris Coleman. Is there any discussion or anything being done to address the call volume at bridges?
Chris, if it's okay, I'll respond to that. So we knew that was going to be the case. It is that case in all those type of facilities. So we weren't surprised by that increase. It's just the way they're set up. They can't service what has to happen, and they're not going to transport themselves. And I would say out of probably almost 100% of the time we're called down there, we're actually transporting the patient. So it's not really a major issue for us. It just added to the call volume that was unpredicted, but we sort of had it predicted.
Okay, thank you.
And Peter, did you have a question? I saw your hand move there.
Yes, I do. I have actually a comment as well as a question. My comment is that I think it would be good to show a summary of pay increases agreed with the unions or otherwise in connection with these presentations for public disclosure. Perhaps that might be done in the future. My question has to do with the impact of the list that I believe is out this week of money that will be available to the towns from the new federal $1.9 trillion stimulus. I understand that some towns are unhappy with the amounts they're receiving and some are more pleased with it. But I'm interested in what Westwood will receive and whether that will affect our budget this year. If anyone knows, maybe Pam here, perhaps she knows the answer.
I could start, and then I'm not sure if Chris would want to add to that, but that, just is coming out now, the money that was announced last week. There appears to be some significant funding coming to Westwood. We do not yet have all of the information about how we can spend that money. It does appear to be broader than the money in the past. that this past year, the money was kind of directed more on an emergency basis. The FEMA money, the CARES money was to get, buildings sanitized, get the fire department, police department continue to be working, get, remote operations for departments and especially the schools. We spent most of our CARES money on the schools. This money seems to be a little bit different coming. We have seen a list that says, again, we've not had anything directly, that Westwood may receive $1.6 million. It's going to be funded over a multi-year period. This spending can go through FY24. So this is different, and we don't have that yet. This is not money that's going to flow into our operating budget or kind of replace things we're currently doing or paying for within our operating budget. This is kind of for different things. So we have to get more information on that. Will be very interesting, and that'll be forthcoming within, the next couple of weeks, we've been told.
Great. Thank you.
I could just add on to that. So thank you, Pam. The guidelines, as I think what Pam was referring to, have not yet been released, but this money is also for economic stimulation within the community. So we do have some ideas of how some of the funds will need to be spent. There's also some talk out there that some funding will be going to Norfolk County, and how Norfolk County will be distributing that additional funding to the communities within the county. So a number of us have already begun discussions or reaching out to Norfolk County to have those conversations. And once again, all these guidelines have been sent down, we'll be able to have a more thorough discussion with them.
Thank you, Chris. Is there anybody else within FinCom that hasn't asked a question that has a question for the group?
Actually, Peter, if I could just address Peter's first question in regards to salary increases and contractual obligations and whatnot. And Pam, please, correct me here. But the book, I think, does a pretty good job of being specific in terms of salaries by department and even by position. So there's certainly no names, but there's titles, and it shows prior year salary and proposed salary for the coming year. And that's for each department. And again, Pam, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think all of that information that we get in the Muni book ends up in the town meeting book as well, does it not? All of those salaries.
Yes, in the town meeting book, we have the salary schedules, like the pay grade schedules for every employee, that shows every position in town, that shows kind of the 1 year pay and then what it would be the next year.
Right. There's certainly no information regarding the contracts and whatnot and that minutia, but in terms of the transparency of the dollars and all, that's pretty well laid out.
Yeah, like in the town meeting book, you'd see the pay scale of a firefighter, what the position pays in FY21 and what's the proposed for 22. There's that for every position.
Right, great. Cool.
Okay, so were you finishing there, Tom? Sorry. I saw Diane's hand raised, and if I can, I'd like to, after Diane, we could move on to the education subcommittee presentation, because we actually have gone pretty far along here. So.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I was really delighted to see in prior year accomplishments the increased staff, cultural, linguistic, racial, and gender diversity to better match our constituency. I'm wondering if we have any information on that in terms of our diversity of our police and fire department.
I can answer for the fire department. I can't speak for the police. We try to change our diversity and match diversity. It's very difficult in our business because you actually have to be a paramedic to get hired by us, because the cost to train an individual that's not a paramedic is close to about $175,000 just to get that person trained, and we don't know if they're going to work for us or not. So we've put a requirement because of the small size of our community and the cost to do that. We put that requirement in that you need to be a paramedic. So in the last 2 years, I've taken applications, almost 200 applications, and we've only hired 4 people in that time frame. And most of them don't fall inside the diversity hiring guidelines that we're looking to get to. But we continue to try constantly to do that. We're always pushing for that. It just hasn't worked out in that sense. So we're working in that direction. I know the police department's worked really hard in that, and they have some great numbers, but I don't see anyone from the police department on this evening, but maybe Chris can speak to that.
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I think it goes back to, Diane, really what the town did when they got out of civil service. I think one of the big pluses of getting out of civil service is the community was then able to go through a selection process to find the right fit for individuals. And I think one of the fortunate things for the police department is they've been able to find a very diverse population at the best for the department. And we've been very fortunate with the chief and lieutenants and the way they've gone through that selection process to hire.
Diane, I know that they promoted the town's second female supervisor. I know that was specifically noted in the personnel highlights, but Chief Silver may have some additional information as it relates to that specific bullet point.
It'd be great if we could sort of see that. That's a great accomplishment if we're doing it, and so it would be really lovely to see those numbers.
So Jane, that's probably a question we could forward. Yeah, you could forward to Chief Silva.
Will do.
And also, Jane, in terms of Q&A from the public, I don't see any open questions right now. Do you see anything? Do you have any record of that?
George Laham has his hand raised, Peter.
Okay, go ahead, George.
Thank you. I just have a question. With the current environment that we're in, I think we're going to see more of it. And this meeting is living proof of it. We're in a remote meeting. Last year, I know we did, I mean, it was mentioned that the town meeting was outside at the Flahay Field, but I think we're going more towards it. So I kind of am curious what the financial impact was last year on, doing, the election, doing the election remotely, people mailing in their votes. The town elections took a huge swing. I mean, there had to be a financial impact of that. We had a presidential primary, we had the presidential general election. I mean, a lot went on there. And I mean, was there a financial impact to the good, to the bad? Did we get, grant money? I mean, what happened with that?
I believe it was a $13,000 savings. Was it, Pam?
We had a huge impact with the elections. It was, an unprecedented election year with the primary, with the presidential election, with all of it being, all of the additional options for voting with the mail-in, and then all the requirements we needed for the day of, because we still had in-person voting, both early voting and then voting on the day of the election and needing to have that set up with all of the COVID safety requirements. We had a huge hit, additional cost on the elections. And Dottie Powers did a great job in making sure that all of that went so smoothly. It really worked out great. That is one of the areas where we received additional funding from federal and state sources. So the town did not have any additional funding that we needed to provide for that, even though there were additional costs. That was one of the areas that really did have significant increase in services. I think I mentioned the last time I was talking to FinCom, we were very fortunate at the close of FY20 and then all of FY21 that all of the additional costs we've had, town departments and the school department, who had significant costs to do what they've been doing all year, we had enough additional funding coming in to cover all that. So when we have our budget supplement articles, those first couple of articles at town meeting, we don't have any supplements for any of our department because of the COVID impact. So I think that's really remarkable. We would have sat at this point last year and thought, how are we going to handle it? There's been enough funding for us to do so. And as I mentioned, we had the funding with the state CARES money. We, spent a majority of that on the school department because they had the biggest hit as far as what they needed to get in place to make everything run smoothly. So we were very fortunate. we had this a little bit at a close of FY20. If you recall last fall, we were talking about how did FY20 close out. We did actually, and we're going to have in the same year in FY21, some departments not spending what they might normally have spent, not to a huge degree, but all of the annual training and conferences,
looking at attendees, I don't see right now.
Things like that occur are all remote.
Westwood or something.
So people are not having to travel to go to those types of things. So there is savings on that end. So it's been an unusual year. Savings in certain areas, significant additional costs for certain departments, but the funding coming to help cover those costs.
And I'm going to take a wild stab that the turnout was better than it's ever been in the past. But Peter, if I can just also make a general statement to, take something off of Pam, just from my personal experience, my professional experience in the past 2.5 weeks, I think it is very unreasonable. Maybe I'm just defending all CPAs out there, but I think it's very unreasonable that that any of us can expect to actually know what DC just passed, because the House passed it on Tuesday, the Senate passed it on Wednesday, the president signed it on Thursday, and it's a retroactive bill. I don't think anybody really knows fully what's in it and how it's really going to impact. And I at least I know on my side, we're getting bits and pieces of it. But for Pam to have any idea really of specifics and how it's going to impact whether the schools, the municipals, anything, it's a house of cards. Nobody, I don't even think the people that voted on it know what's in it, but that's a different story.
Yeah, thank you, George. I think that's exactly right. And I'll just stress again, this wave seems to be different spending. So Chris mentioned, there's opportunity for economic development support in town. We couldn't do that with the CARES or FEMA, helping businesses or helping residents. There seems to be some allowance for that with this funding. And so the town's going to be very, very cautious. Again, this is not the same funding as before, like, get the computers, get the kids set up. This seems to be different kind of long-term help the economy rebound type spending. So we're going to be much slower with that, but we've not seen anything yet. To your point, George, Chris and I were asked to comment. Did we want to make a public comment on how much Westwood had received in the funding? We didn't even know what we had received. We weren't going to comment on that. But it was a very fast moving, scenario, as you've mentioned. But it will be very interesting to see as it rolls out, because there's also separate money for the schools. And again, I think that's to help them address, that there may be long-term impacts of the COVID. Again, not just to get everyone a computer and get them set up for remote, but what might change in the school operations over the next, as I said, the spending looks like it can go for a couple of fiscal years. So there'll be a lot more to come on that, and it's different. This funding seems to be trying to get at different things.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, I know you're short on time, but I just want to make sure that if there are any specific questions for the town clerk, Dottie Powers is on.
Okay. Anyone have anything specifically for Dottie? Not seeing any. I think we'll move on.
Nice job with the
Diane,
election.
to the education.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So Diane, if you could share the presentation and.
Sure, thanks. Peter, let me just check on timing here. You mentioned 6:55. Do we have to
actually what'll happen is the live feed will cut off at that point in time, but we can still continue.
Okay, good. Thank you. Bill, I think you were going to share the presentation.
Yeah, apparently I have to reboot Zoom for it to allow me to do that. So give me a minute and maybe you can.
I can talk. I can
talk without it.
I can talk while he's working. So so the subcommittee, the education subcommittee is myself, Bill, Bruce, he's working really hard and already did it. George Laham and Mike Powers. George and Bill are new to the committee this year and just were fabulous additions. Thank you so much. And Mike has been doing this with me for a couple of years. So what we're going to do is I'm going to do the introduction and talk a little bit about the impact of COVID on last year's budget and the impact on this year's budget. George is going to give us the overall proposed budget and some of the details on that budget. Bill is going to give us the special education budget, and then Mike is going to give us the capital budget. And we want to start by thanking Emily Parks and her staff, as well as the school committee and Carol, who were present in all of the meetings for a really, just as every year, just a remarkably engaged process to educate us as to the details of the budget and work with us to sort of understand what's gone on. So we want to thank them. The process is that the departments, all the departments in the district submit their proposed budgets. The administration works with those budgets to come up with the budget that they propose to the school committee. The school committee has a public hearing on that. This year, the school committee unanimously accepted the proposed budget. They then came here to our Finance and Warrant Commission and did a presentation of that proposed budget. After that presentation to the Finance and Warrant Commission, the subcommittee, the four of us, met with Emily Parks and her staff, and as I said, members of the school committee as well, to review that in detail, answered a lot of questions, and then worked with us even further to develop our presentation tonight. So here we are before you to present our presentation. With every year, the budget is designed to meet the contractual obligations, to talk about outstanding new needs, and we're gonna focus on that part a little bit this evening, and to look at the district priorities. Budget is developed by the district leadership team with all of the input from all the cost centers leaders, and then with the school committee, as we just said. And as in every year, there are some requests that are deferred. This year, I think one of those requests that was initially deferred was a staff person to work on the security, to have someone dedicated for that. And we knew that they had been working on that for years. They'd, commissioned a report along with the town to look at school security. And I think this committee encouraged them to take a look at maybe finding a way to include that in this year's budget. And they did. The school committee voted to include that position in this year's budget. So that's one example of a request that was initially deferred, but they took it up this year. So before we get into the operating budget, I do want to say a couple of words about COVID and the impact that COVID had on the school budget this last year. I don't think that there's any way that we can talk to you or FIDCOM can really understand the school budget without acknowledging the challenges of the 2021 school year. The district was able to move with remarkable flexibility into a hybrid model in the fall. And they did that using live synchronous instruction via video conferencing. And in a lot of districts, that was not taught by the kids' actual teachers, their everyday teachers. Here in Westwood, it was. So there wasn't that kind of disruptive, it was of course disruptive, it was terribly disruptive to the students, but they kept their own teachers, they worked with their own teachers, and that I think was a great success. And so not only did COVID really challenge the way in which they offered education, but it challenged their budget. So here we look at some of the things that some expenses that just weren't anticipated. Technology expenses of over $600,000. Student services, the staff nursing of over $500,000. another 400,000 in supplies, food service supplies, lunch supervision, things that they had to think about. They offered free lunches, but how did the kids get those? You know, how did that work? Very different than when the kids are in school and they're just going into the cafeteria. So all of this, they had to rethink. And then, of course, there was the PPE and the storage and the signage and the disinfect, all of that also had to be incorporated into this budget in a way that was totally unexpected. So, so they had some help with that. They reallocated some state funding. They reallocated some staff positions, and we're going to talk about some reallocation of staff positions as we look at the budget proposed for this year, because they reallocated some positions over the summer to take into account all of this, and then they kept some of those. So you're going to see some of that as we go forward. Then state funding was provided by Massachusetts for COVID-related expenses, and then of course we had the CARES FEMA money that the town we've already heard about. And the town actually used some of that money to support all of those supplies that we just mentioned that the schools had to buy. So despite all of that additional expenses, the school is on track to close fiscal year 21 budget without having to take any further stabilization measures. So really impressive work by our school and our school committee and our school administration. So with that intro, I'm going to turn it over to George, who's going to talk about some of the details in the fiscal year 22 budget.
Thanks, Diane. I think Bill's going to work the slides here, but kind of on a high level, the overall proposed increase is 3.4%, which is about 0.46 less than the past 5-year average. Which has been 3.96. So, their 3.4 is a pretty modest increase. Of the 3.4 increase, 77% of that is essentially previously committed agreements, contracts with the union. And like most companies, the biggest expense is labor. And in this case, 77% of the increase is associated with union contracts, which, out of the total increase of about 1.6 million, 1.2 of that is the committed union negotiated salaries. The remaining 23%, which is roughly about 375,000, is special ed, operations, maintenance, utilities, and non-salaried positions, which for us would be, the principals, superintendent, and other district-wide administrators, directors, special ed, or whatnot. So, essentially, they're asking for a 0.4% increase on what I consider discretionary increase, what they actually have control over. And at a 0.4% increase, again, which translates to about $375,000, it's what the schools need to keep their consistency or their level, the level of quality and consistent with the towns around us. What does that really translate to? Through staffing, we're talking about a net increase. Thanks, Bill. A net increase of about 3.8 full-time employees. Now, before you net it out, we're increasing 12.8 FTEs and we're reducing 9. And due to the shift of the student population, I'm sorry. Oh, the reduction is mostly at the high school and district-wide level. 6.6 is reduced at the middle school and high school, and 2.4 in a district-wide. The increase is about 6.4 full-time employees for the elementary schools, 2.4 for the middle school, and 2 for the district, and 2 for the high school. But it clearly shows that the costs and the shift in the I guess population of the students is definitely shifting more to the elementary. Right now, there's currently about 3,000 students, and next year it's estimated about 2,900. but as I said, the elementary is increasing while the middle school and high school are decreasing, which is shown in the slides. But as far as the overall increase, 3.4, where again 77% of it is previously contracted. That's a big portion of any increase, and of the remaining, as I said, 23%. The majority of that is non-salaried staff and special education. So they're really saving in operations, maintenance, and in the utilities. And that's about all I have, Diane.
Okay. I'll just talk a little bit about special education and then hand it over to Mike to finish us off. But this just kind of highlights at a high level the different buckets within special education. I think the next slide here gives a little better breakdown of kind of what's going on. But overall, a planned 3% increase in tuitions, increases in transportation. I think what, the real focus from a special education standpoint is to ensure that we're educating folks in district, and there's some stats on the next slide I'll hit on. I think the one budget item that kind of stands out a little bit, wanted to make sure to explain, is that there's an increase in contracted services of 85,000. And what this is they did a look back, Emily and the team, and historically this has been an underfunded budget item. Historically, we've budgeted for something in the 200,000 range, and they've actually seen about $500,000 in expenses looking back over the last few years. So what they're going to do is they're going to do a multi-year approach, increasing at 85,000 in order to kind of get the 200,000 in line with the historical costs we've seen in the $500,000 range. And just from a standpoint of what's in the contracted service bucket, this is really for those highly specialized services and consultations that we need. And the school department does anticipate an increased need in those services going forward as a result of part of the COVID recovery. And then if we flip to the next slide, just a little bit of a report card in terms of special education. And as a reminder, 18.7% of students are in special education. Comprise about 26% of the budget, but I think the big thing is only out of district placements is only at 0.6%, and that's been pretty consistent, over the last few years, and in line with comparable communities, and definitely below the statewide average, north of 1%. And it really highlights the focus to bring stuff in district, as well as provide that extended year program that helps to do that. So that's special education at a high level in terms of what's going on. On to capital.
Okay, the capital, thank you, Bill. It's actually 2 slides. Here's the breakdown. As you can see, similar amounts for the past few years that the school department has asked to fund for the capital budget. And they use it primarily to address issues, unplanned for issues such as a roof emergency, HVAC, etc. And one of the good things that they've demonstrated over time, that they're very conscious about what the capital budget is. They have a certain amount they allocate, and they use it judiciously, and they spread that out and carry it over to the next year should there be a positive year where there's less things to be done. The only thing that changed this year from prior years' capital budget is the 15-year-old van. But let me just say that Diane actually started with it. They've been very cooperative with us, Emily and Lemma, the entire group. One of the things, and Diane mentioned it, that really struck me a couple of years ago as a result of pressures with school security, with horrific things happening around the nation. One of the decisions that the school department did in cooperation with FinCom is they reallocated a certain amount of monies to be spent to do a study. And Diane referenced it. This year, they're going to put additional monies towards that to address those things that were in the study that expose some security weaknesses throughout the system. So I applaud them for that and continuing to do the right things from a fiscal responsibility standpoint. That's all I got.
So just to wrap up, I just want to circle back to where we started, and that was to talk about how this current school year has impacted everybody, the administration, the kids, everybody. But what they learned in this current school year, they're really implementing in the next school year. They're anticipating that the kids are going to be back in the classroom full time. So everybody's thinking about that. They're also anticipating that the kids are going to need increased mental health support. So when you look at some of the ways that they've changed some of the staffing around, they've done it to bolster the mental health support for the kids. And in the middle school, they've actually added some like math specialists, places where they know that the kids didn't get everything they needed this year. So they've really focused on bolstering the areas next fiscal year that they know they're going to need in order to support those kids going back to school full time and not having access to the teachers in the same way that they did. Math is a really great example of that. And then the school psychologist that they're adding. Yeah. And then I just want to say one other thing about that. I was a little bit concerned when I saw sort of the decreases in the high school and really wanted to dig into that a little bit. And so we did. In the high school, as I think George said, the enrollment is coming down in the high school, but they really did a targeted approach to those reductions in the high school, and they thought very carefully about them, and they make a lot of sense. So I think that we as a committee, and I think the committee agrees, came away very impressed with the budgeting process, as I have every year of the school committee, and the collaborative way they work with the subcommittee. So we just want to thank them and recognize that.
Diane, just to augment what you said, specifically the mental and social health for the kids, they're adding 4 ABA tutors at the elementary level to help with children who are on IEPs, as well as 3 additional general ed teachers across the district for the elementary level, and specifically a school psychologist at elementary level district-wide, and 1 specifically dedicated to the Hanlon. So those are all on the, I would call it general special ed, but as you said, the mental and social health.
So that's it for us.
Okay. Thanks, Diane, to you and your team. This was a really good presentation. I think it encapsulates things really well. And a special thanks to Emily and her team. I can't imagine what the year was like for all the folks under Emily, with all the COVID challenges that they had, still having to try to educate the students with all the adversity they've come under and the funding impacts, and also, by the way, trying to plan for a new school in the middle of all that. So it's an amazing achievement.
Oh, I didn't realize Emily was here. Emily, hi.
Hi, I am here. Hello.
Hi. Did we accurately represent our discussions?
I think you did a great job. Thank you. And I would thank the subcommittee as well, and the FinCom. I think it's been a good process, and you asked good questions, and that was a great conversation that we had with the subcommittee. So thank you for your efforts.
Great. So I would go right into any FinCom members that have any specific questions, just to kind of raise your hand regarding the presentation that you saw and the school budget. I see Peter Ittig. Go ahead, Peter.
Yes, I have a question. Actually, I did a little online search regarding the Westwood schools. One of the things I was very impressed with is the high regard that Westwood schools are held in. And Westwood schools have an excellent reputation. I think that's fine. It's an asset to the community. And my question is, is it accurate to say that Westwood spends about $20,000 per student per year? And I'm interested in how that might compare with other towns nearby.
So our per pupil expenditure, the last time it was reported publicly, I think is for FY19, it was $19,378. So that's our per pupil. And I think that is, it's higher than the state average, which isn't surprising, I think, in terms of sort of the value that Westwood places on education and the resources it allocates there. But I think it's very much in line with our neighboring communities, with other comparable school districts. And in fact, in the executive summary in the budget book, I provided a graph that compares the per pupil spending of Boston Magazine's top 25 high schools. And Westwood is pretty much at the median in that comp group.
Emily, let me throw some stats in there because that was probably something that I should have hit. As Westwood spends, as it said, an average of $19,378, which is 13% higher than the state average, which, as Ms. Sparks, as Emily mentioned, at $17,149. If you were to compare to a community like Dover Sherborne, we're a little bit less than them. If you compare to like Medfield, we're more. But I think if you were to look in the Boston Magazine, I think we were rated. Emily, you can correct me, but I believe we were in the top 13, top 12. I'm sure you know that number better, but I
don't know the exact ranking, but somewhere in that neighborhood, yes.
So it's you are correct, Peter. We're right up there in the state.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from FinCom members? Bill, did I see your hand, or is that what that was? Just a no? Okay. All right.
One thing maybe I'll just mention, and Emily, you correct me if I'm wrong here, but just for information for the committee, the schools have started what's called pool testing, COVID testing for the kids. And I think that's fabulous. So the teachers, as you know, are now getting inoculated. They're getting those shots based on the federal and the state plan. But the kids are getting COVID tests. And these, maybe Emily, you could just share a little bit with the committee if the committee's interested about what this pool testing is.
Sure. So we have an opportunity for students now to be tested for COVID on a weekly basis. It's like a surveillance testing program. So it would allow us to quickly identify students who are positive for COVID but asymptomatic and quickly get them into quarantine. So it's just an additional mitigation measure, which I think is really important as we're talking about an April 5th transition to bringing all kids back into the classroom. And so we were able to launch this. We've collaborated with Project Beacon, which is the outfit that runs the state Stop the Spread sites. The Department of Education is actually paying for it through, I think, April 18th. And then at that point, we'll be incorporating it into our budget. The pool testing is it's an efficient and economical way to go about it. It costs about $3 per student to implement this program. So I would say at this point, our challenge is we're just trying to get our participation rates up. We just launched it last week. We're hoping for 70% participation. That's what the public health people say you need to really kind of get the full impact of it. And as of last week, we were about 35%, so halfway there. So I'm hoping more people will hear about it.
Haven't opted in. Is that what it is? You need an opt-in?
Yeah, so you have to opt in. So parents have to set up a account for their student through Project Beacon and provide consent. And we want to get the word out. This particular kind of testing, it's the anterior nasal swab. It's not the horribly uncomfortable one that they stick up to your brain. It's a very painless, gentle process. And in fact, kids in grades 2 and up can self-swab. So we just need more people to get on board. And I think it provides assurance to individuals, but more importantly, I think it's just a gesture that it keeps the community safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, good luck with that, Emily.
Thanks. Thanks, Dan.
Okay. Well, once again, not to be too repetitive, but Diane, thanks to you and your subcommittee team, and Emily, of course, all your team for all the support you've done for us, and all the information that you've provided us. Has made the process, a difficult process, a little bit simpler. So I think, Jane, I'm not seeing any questions from the public. Is that correct? Are you muted, Jane?
I'm sorry, there are no questions, Peter.
Yeah, okay. All right, so at this point, I'd like to move forward to our kind of, as we're done with the presentations, to the other section of our agenda for the FinCom. So in terms of new business, Jane had sent out the minutes from the prior meeting that we had last week, the March 8th meeting. And just don't know if there's any discussion regarding those minutes. Okay, seeing no hands raised, do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve those minutes.
Okay, we have a motion. We have a second.
I'll second it.
Okay. Jane, could you take the vote on
Ready.
that?
Peter Lenz.
Yes.
Bill Bruce.
Yes.
Jim Ferraro. Not present. Lauren Fitzpatrick.
Yes.
Craig Fiscaldo.
Yes.
George Hertz.
Yes.
Angela Hughes.
Yes.
Peter Ittig.
Yes.
Caitlin Jerzak.
Yes.
Thank you. Tom Kilgariff.
Yes.
George Laham.
Yes.
Diane McCarthy.
Yes.
Chris Pareda.
Yes.
And Mike Powers.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. That was all the new business that I really had, especially considering the time here. In terms of old business, I wanted to have a discussion regarding our final public hearing,
Well,
which will be
perhaps new business.
Excuse me?
I would like to introduce an item in new business, perhaps a motion.
Okay, Peter, but I had started the discussion for some other things, so I'll give you some time, but let me complete what I was going to say. So in terms of our schedule, we have a public hearing that is scheduled for March 29th. And if we go over, potentially March 30th. So what we have there is that the final discussion of the warrant articles. So we will have representatives from the town in to present a little bit further regarding their warrant articles, especially if there's any particular changes in the wording to those articles. I think it's incumbent upon us to, because this is our last chance to talk to those folks before we vote, and then subsequent to our vote, do our write-ups, that we're really prepared for anything. So if there's any questions that you have in advance of that meeting that we could submit to different town personnel, that would be beneficial if you could submit those to Jane and myself, and then we could forward those along to any of those officials. To the extent that you have to do a write-up and you don't feel that you've got enough information, then I think this is a great opportunity to get a question or two in advance. But certainly, to the extent you don't have that, certainly make sure we pay very close attention to whatever is presented to us then. I did want to talk about a couple of changes to the responsibilities, because some things have changed regarding the warrant articles. So we mentioned before that Kate Wynn has resigned from the group because she's running for a planning board position. So she was assigned 2 different articles: budget article, select board budget article 7, additional capital improvements regarding it really was the Westwood, the 2 questions, budget 7 and budget 8 regarding the Westwood Lodge. Those particular articles are very similar to last year. And when we looked at who wrote up those articles last year, sad to say it was me. So I have volunteered to be the person that writes up those articles. So I'm raising my hand already on that one.
Peter, I'll help.
No, I think it's going to be pretty easy, actually.
Okay.
I didn't want to make it look like I was falling on my sword too much there. I think it's going to be pretty easy.
I'll second that, Peter.
Yeah. Plus, as you know, Jane does all the work anyway.
That's true.
So then we have budget article 14. And I don't have that in front of me as specifically what it is, but I did have, because we didn't have anyone put on for that.
Peter, not to interrupt you, but that is that's the new article with the, it's called appropriation, additional capital equipment borrowing article.
Okay, this is equipment borrowing article.
Yes,
okay.
and Craig has his hand up too. I don't know if you want to acknowledge him.
I'm sorry?
I was just waiting my turn for the end when Peter was done.
Oh, okay. And George, I know in the past, George Hertz, I should say, I know in the past you've said, hey, I'll raise my hand to do an article. And I don't think you...
I'll take it, no problems, Peter.
Article writing is limited here this year, even though you may be our most valuable writer. So
I'll take it.
Do that. Thanks for that. In terms of what the planning board has done, as you're aware of, the planning board kind of took their original zoning article regarding medical uses and made it 3 articles. And at the time, Lauren and Jim were assigned for that. And I thought it would be pretty logical for Lauren and Jim to just, as that was kind of trifurcated, let me just say, into 3 different, to take over the write-ups associated with those. But I didn't want to just foist that upon you. Lauren and Jim, is that okay for you to kind of just do the entire planning?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I think I wrote up 2 last year, the medical use. I did that article last year. So, and then with their presentation this year, even though they broke it up into 3, it should be pretty straightforward for the most part. So yeah, not a problem.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. So I believe, Jane, that was the sum of kind of what we needed to do associated with assignments on the articles.
You're
right?
exactly right. Yes.
Okay. All right. Let me see. So Peter Ittig, you had raised your hand to bring up some other business.
Yes, a different issue. I'm concerned about the impact of the override that will be coming soon. I mentioned this before. This will be an increase of about 5% in the average property tax bill. And if it's done, that would be in addition to the usual increase of about 3% for operating expenses. So if it's done at the same time as in 2 years, as the high school bond is paid off, this would be a total increase of about 7.5% or 8% if it's done earlier. But this is a large tax increase that will be difficult for some taxpayers. And I would like to consider the possibility that the select board include a concession of some sort for seniors to encourage them to support it. Seniors mostly don't have children in the schools, so they benefit only indirectly from large overrides of this type. There are some existing tax breaks for seniors, as was mentioned previously, but these are very little value for most seniors in Westwood, as they are generally means tested, which means basically you need to become poor first. So I would like to propose that the town consider a concession of some sort for seniors. And I would like to introduce a motion to have the commission recommend something like that. I have a motion prepared, but I'm interested in whether I need to introduce that in order for there to be discussion, or whether we might have some discussion first.
Well, I think the process would be you would introduce a motion.
Okay, I'm prepared to do that.
Then we could see if it is seconded.
Okay.
If it is seconded.
We need a second in order to discuss the issue. But my motion, which I'm...
Oh, we can, I'm sorry,
yes,
Peter.
Peter. Yeah, you don't have to, you can open it up for discussion, Peter.
Okay.
Yes, you absolutely can do that.
Well, how about, so we understand exactly what Peter's saying. Maybe what you could do is read the motion such that we could discuss it better.
Okay, all right, good. And I would be agreeable to changes in the motion. This is a possibility. But what I have follows. Whereas proposed school overrides will substantially increase the average property tax on homes in addition to the usual increases for other expenses. And as these increases may be a problem for seniors on fixed incomes, and as seniors mostly do not have children in the schools, therefore the commission recommends that the select board consider a property tax concession for seniors to coincide with the school overrides, such as a split tax rate if all residents of a home are over 65, perhaps allowing for a 5% reduction in property taxes for those homes. And we need a second to discuss the issue.
No, I was in error, Peter, that we can still discuss it, but I just wanted you to say it so people understand really what you're proposing. Then we can have a discussion and then decide if we second it and then vote on it.
Right.
Okay. So with that said, any discussion? I see Craig first, then Tom, and then Mike.
So Peter, I'm definitely sympathetic to the issue you're raising here. I have a couple of questions though. What dollar amount impact would that be to the budget? And where would the funding gap come from?
If you're asking me to answer that question, that's difficult. I don't have numbers in front of me that will allow me to project that. I don't know the assessed value of the homes in Westwood that are owned by seniors. I know that about 20% of the folks in Westwood are seniors, but I have no idea of the assessed value of their homes. So I can't answer that. It may be possible for Pam or someone to come up with.
So even if you don't have the numbers, where would the funding gap come from?
Somebody's got to pay for it.
Yeah.
Well, this would be reduced increases, not a decrease in the actual tax on the senior homes. This would be, for example, if there were to be a 5% increase in the average property tax due to the first override and a 3% increase for operating expenses, that's 8%. A 5% reduction would mean the seniors would still face an increase. It would just be not as large.
Right, but if the seniors don't pay that 5% increase, someone else has to pay that 5% increase.
Indeed.
So where would that come from?
It would be just as we have a split rate for commercial property and residential property, the tax rate has to rise to cover the expenses.
Peter, I think Craig is bringing up an excellent point. If the real estate tax bill is $10 and you're a senior and it gets discounted down to $6, there's $4 that somebody's got to pay to cover your discount. So the pizza pie is still there. Who's going to cover that? So does that mean that Mr. Powers is getting a $4 discount? Does that mean I have to pay $4 more to cover his bill? Because the pizza pie is still got to be shared. So who's going to cover that $4? I believe that's what Craig is asking.
Well, yes, I'd like to suggest a different perspective. I think the seniors in Westwood, to a substantial extent, are pushed to leave by the rising tax bills. And when seniors are pushed out, as we discussed a few minutes ago, the town spends an average of about $20,000 per student per year. When you push out a family of seniors in favor of a working couple with several students, you're increasing the spending on the school system substantially. The seniors tend to be light users of town services, but still pay property taxes. And your that replacement of the seniors with the working couple and several children means a couple of additional autos on the roads during the rush hour. So the that replacement is a burden on the town. In my view, there are several reasons to encourage seniors to stay in their homes rather than be pushed to leave by rising taxes. And one is that I think it's the right thing to do for the seniors, but the other is that there's a cost calculation that suggests the town should want to do this, should want to encourage the seniors to stay and not be replaced by that larger family that will add children to the school system.
Okay, so I'd like to, I had said before Tom and then Mike, and then I see George Hertz has raised his hand. So let's go Tom, then Mike, and then George.
Well, thanks, Peter. So Peter, I think we understand the question, and my first question is more rhetorical because the folks that probably know the answer are no longer on the call. But how was it handled when the high school was built in terms of override? But I'll leave that as rhetorical for a moment. But there's other people in town that are not senior age that don't have kids in the school system. So where do you draw the line? What if somebody doesn't use the fire department for a year? So should they be exempt from fire department expense? And you can go down the line. The big picture here is also that the school system and a lot of other things that the town does in terms of managing its expenses help prop up property values. So do people that then are exempt of certain expenses associated with those property value increases, do they then forfeit somehow those property value increases? Obviously the answer there is no. So I just don't see how that can be executed fairly, because there's school system is only one aspect of the town, a big one, but there's a whole lot of other things going on in the town too that are expenses. So I don't see how you can start slicing and dicing it.
And the way I'd like to see this, thank you for your comments, Tom. The way I'd like to see this work is to make sure that we try to talk to people that have an opinion, not to have responses to each comment that everyone makes. So Mike, if we could go to you next.
Yes, both Craig and Tom actually raised the questions that I had and also made the points that I would have made.
Okay, thank you. Then George.
Yeah, just a couple of observations. First of all, there is no override scheduled for this year. The article really is the $1.7 million. And there is no override. So it's really not something that we even can address this year. Number two, the whole purpose of the override is we are a democracy. It gives people the right to vote in town to decide whether or not they want to support it. That's why we have overrides under Proposition 2.5, and people have to make that decision. And while I'm sensitive to what Peter said, the other point I would make, at some point in time, these seniors had children in the school system, and there were seniors beyond them who didn't. So it's a bit of an evolving life cycle. But if you choose to live in this town, there are times when you use a lot of services and times you don't. So while I'm sensitive, Peter, to your concerns, I also think we've decided that it's not for the FinCom to, really what you're talking about, it's not a FinCom role to make that kind of policy decision or recommendation. We are not elected officials. That's what our elected officials are supposed to do. But bottom line is, it's a bit of a moot point since the $1.7 million article this year does not involve an override. And yet we did ask the presenters under full disclosure to show what the potential impact of the override would be. So those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else from FinCom who hasn't made a comment on this?
Oh, I would like to make one additional observation. The seniors tend to vote. In fact, seniors tend to disproportionately vote, and seniors tend to be quite sensitive to large tax increases. A concession of some sort for the seniors might help to encourage them to support the override when it comes for a vote, perhaps next year.
Okay, I'll allow George Leham one more comment, and then
Chris Pareda hasn't spoken either.
Oh, well, I didn't see Chris's hand. I'm sorry.
I just want to let you know.
Go ahead, Mr. Go ahead. Well, I just have. Go ahead.
I'll go first, and then George can stop. Peter, this is a very novel approach to this issue, and I commend you for thinking out of the box. But as George said, I think it exceeds our role here. This is more appropriately brought before the select board so they can consider it, and if they like it, adopt it as fiscal policy. It has ramifications. We have a split tax rate between residential and commercial that the state allows us to do. I have no idea whether or not any other towns have even thought about this, or if we are the first one, and I'm not opposed to being the first one on a novel solution to a complex problem, whether the state would allow us to do it. But I agree with George. I think it's out of our lane and therefore not appropriate for the Finance Commission to be making recommendations of this nature.
Okay, George Leham.
I just, something in my head is making me remember there is a group in town that also, or maybe it's through the town, if somebody needs assistance or is struggling paying a tax bill, there is a group that assists with that. So, if a senior is struggling to, compensate or pay that, there is a group in the town that does help that. And I know that, they take donations, but there is already a group in place to assist. So if there are
community chest, Georgia.
Not the Westwood Community Chest. That's what it. Yeah, I mean they are able to assist, and it's just I think Craig's point is as spot on as you can be. There's a pizza. You gotta feed everybody. If somebody eats more, somebody's going to have to make up for it. If somebody eats less, somebody's got to make up for it. So by discounting the seniors, you're going to make somebody who had 3 kids pay more. And the argument can also be made, which I make to my father all the time. He has more dispendable cash, even though he's retired. He has more disposable income. Those with the kids and students, they don't have as much disposable income because they have 3 or 4 or 2 kids. So it's, there's too many arguments that can be made on both sides.
And George, also the Aid to the Elderly Fund also assists seniors.
That's
yes,
yeah.
But yes.
And isn't there also a work program where the seniors can work for the town?
Yes, there is. Community service they do.
So I think we've had some good discussion here. Peter Ittig has made a motion. Is there a second to that motion?
So Peter, excuse me for interrupting. I think he read the motion just as reading it so you could have a discussion. So if because he said he didn't know whether or not he was going to make the motion. So just to be super clear, if Peter Ittig wants to make a motion, he could do that now. Official motion.
Yes, I did introduce a motion. Should I read it again?
Yes, because Peter, the chairman asked you to read it just so you could have a discussion. So if you said you weren't sure whether you're going to make the motion, but you'd like to do that now, officially make a motion?
Yes, I would.
Okay, then go ahead and read it.
All right. Whereas proposed school overrides will substantially increase the average property tax on homes in addition to the usual increases for other expenses, and as these increases may be a problem for seniors on fixed incomes, and as seniors mostly do not have children in the schools, therefore the commission recommends that the select board consider a property tax concession for seniors to coincide with the school overrides, such as a split tax rate if all residents of a home are over 65, allowing for a 5% reduction in property taxes for those homes.
Okay, so Peter has made that motion. Is there a second to that motion? I am not seeing a second. Is that correct? Not seeing a second to that motion, we're not going to call a vote on that motion and not submit that motion for record.
Yes.
Okay. Any other business?
Peter?
Yes,
Can I speak one comment? I've had the privilege of sitting through a lot of these committee presentations, and I would like to compliment both the municipal committee and the school committee folks. You did a thorough job. It was fun reading the presentation before, but I think you all hit a home run, and I understand how much work you put in. So thank you very, very much for a very thorough set of presentations on the municipal and on the school side.
Thank you, George. Craig, I saw your hand up.
This is from when I had my hand up prior, and it was in regards to your comment about, if we can be as prepared as possible for the public hearings and getting questions in. And I would ask if there's a way we can get at least a planning board article as soon as possible. I know it's always been a moving target in prior years. And
yeah, they're meeting as we speak right now. So they just started their meeting.
Okay.
So I'm going to, when I sign off here, I'm going to try to get into that meeting and see what happens in terms of that change. And then maybe between Jane and myself, we can try to put some pressure on them to.
Right. Yeah, I know it's been done in prior years and it might be helpful this year.
Right. Okay. Good point.
Good point.
Okay. So with that said, then
George Laham has his hand raised. Excuse me, Peter.
Oh, go ahead, George.
You're still muted, George.
I didn't understand at the last meeting. I know we keep talking about this 1.7 or 1.8 override that needs to take place for the school. I'm sorry?
It's not an override.
Okay. Okay.
It's a warrant article.
The warrant article for the schools. I know we spoke about it and we kind of dug into some detail. And I think there was some information that would be notable for the FinCom to understand. When we went over it, they basically told us there was $41.7 million of repairs that would be required to do, which we would not get any state funding or assistance for. And the total project was 88 million if we start from scratch and rebuild, or 41 to repair. And on the 88 million, we would be able to get about 18 million from the state, kind of taking the cost down to about 70 million. So the real cost of this new building of the school project really broke down to only about 27. The Delta project, the Delta cost would be only about 27.8 million. And I don't know if that's something that we should be presenting, because in reality, we're going to either have to repair it or do a new one. and the additional cost to do a new one is about 27 million. I don't know, is that our responsibility to bring up, or, you know, is that something that we should talk about when people say, why are we going to spend this money?
Yeah, I think that, you know, it's a good point, but when we actually do our voting on these warrant articles, that will be part of our discussion. So I think what you're saying is good. It, you know, kind of puts things in perspective. Certainly we're not voting on the entire school budget, but some may see that expenditure as a referendum on the school building. So I think it's appropriate for us to kind of have that discussion and have that understanding.
Thank you.
We can do it.
It's my understanding that you're not looking for our committee to do a presentation on that warrant article.
No.
Okay.
Okay. With that said, do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I will make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
Okay. Jane, can you take the vote?
I sure can. Peter Lenz?
Yes.
Bill Bruce?
Yes.
Jim Ferraro? Sorry, I keep saying that. Lauren Fitzpatrick?
Yes.
Craig Foscaldo?
Yes.
George Hertz?
Yes.
Angela Hughes?
Yes.
Peter Iddig?
Yes.
Caitlin Jerzak?
Yes.
Tom Kilgariff?
Yes.
George Laham?
Yes.
Diane McCarthy?
Yes.
Chris Prada? Mike Powers?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
You hear me? I said yes.
I did hear you.
Only part of it.
Thank you. Great job tonight, everybody.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Great discussion.